Welcome to Cybe Stories, Pedro. It's so great to have you with me today.
Thank you for having me.
As we're getting started, I'd love for the listeners to know a little bit about who you are right now, what you're doing.
I live in Nashville, married to a beautiful and amazing follower of Christ. Um, and I also became a father like one year and a half ago, like 2 years ago almost. And I live in Nashville, as I said. I'm an outreach director at a church, so trying to meet needs in the community. And I also work for Biologos, which is an organization that brings science and faith together. I'm kind of leading the Spanish side of it with them. I also do translations for a ministry called GodQuestions.org, and it's called Bible Rev, which is a Bible commentary that I'm translating from English to Spanish. And then when I have some time, um, I also have a very small organization called Ask and Wonder, and what I do is to bring Christians and non-Christians together to have conversations about the big questions in life. So that's kind of what I do and who I am.
Oh, it sounds like a very full life,
Yeah,
really wonderful life.
yeah.
And congratulations on your on being a father. That's
Well,
that's
thank you.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't we get into your story?
Mm.
Pedro, tell me, obviously you say you do some Spanish translation. I can
Yeah.
detect a dialect. Why don't you tell me where you're from originally, where you grew up? Tell me what that world was like. Was God any part of that world in your
Mm.
family, in your culture?
Mm. So I'm originally from Spain, and Spain is a very secular culture. And you would say, from the distance, like it's a very Catholic culture. I mean, surely there are churches almost everywhere, but Catholicism is very nominalistic in Spain. So it has become something that is almost like floating in the air, but no one cares about it truly. And actually, many people that consider themselves Catholics in Spain are they're Catholics because of tradition, but not because they actually follow the Catholic doctrine. And in so I grew up in a very secular culture. My family, though, is interesting because my father was Catholic, then he wasn't Catholic, then he moved to Australia with my mom, and he started going to a church that was a Protestant church there in Australia, but then he didn't have a good experience because something happened or someone took advantage of him. So he went back to Spain, not because of that, but that happened to him. And then my uncle and my cousin are Jehovah Witnesses, and then also my brother, who is an incredible person, but he's very interested in what he would say he would call ufology, which is anything related to UFOs and this type of thing. So I'm saying all of this is because my growing up, the culture in which I grew up was rich in when it came to ideas, without kind of analyzing the validity of the ideas themselves. For now, there was a lot. And when I was growing up, I went to a Catholic school, and I believed in God. I mean, I didn't know. My experience with Catholicism was very strange because if you were to ask me when I was in Catholic school what the gospel it was or is, I wouldn't have known. So I actually called myself a Catholic without even know what the gospel was. So, and by the way, any comments that I make, Jana, about Catholicism, I'm not making comments about Catholicism itself, but my experience with it. So
I understand.
when it comes to truthfulness or all of that, that's a conversation to have in a different perhaps discussion. But so yeah, I started asking questions. I've always loved wondering about the big questions in life. That was just part of who I am and who I was. I've always been that way. And my questions were not well received, to be honest with you, in this. in my culture, and especially in my Catholic school. And because of the reaction that I saw from my teachers, and then me not being able to separate Christ from what people say about Christ, because I was very young and ignorant. So I made the rush decision of saying, "Oh, this is religion is stupid. This is all a lie. Therefore, I'm
Mm.
not a Christian anymore." More things
What
happen.
ki-
Yeah.
what kind of questions were you asking
So the first
that
thing
people?
was, since I had my family, was some of them, my uncle, my cousin were Jehovah Witnesses, and I heard people criticizing them continually. I actually asked questions not out of anger, but I like truly knowing, for example, what is the difference between the Catholic Church and Jehovah Witnesses when it comes to actually believe something that is beyond ourselves? When it comes to doctrine, what is the difference between this and that? And they heard those questions as like an attack instead of
Mm,
just, hey, I really want to know, because if you're claiming, some people are claiming that this is true and others are claiming that this is true, and all of this, I actually want to tap onto as much as I can in order to see what's happening. How much is man-made and how much is hopefully potentially God made. And also, which is something very very usual when it comes to skeptics that look at religion this way, which is when you see inconsistencies in the way, I say I believe this, but then I behave in that way. So i
right.
also i also saw a lot of that. But again, Jana, I really lacked the knowledge and the introspection and the capacity to actually analyze the situation and say, hey, there's a difference between Christ and what people say and do in His name. I
Mm,
mean, if there were no difference, Jana, I actually wouldn't be a Christian today, because I'm still
right.
challenged. I'm still challenged by seeing the things that I do as a Christian and what other people do while calling themselves Christians. But since we're not the filter through which we should judge, eternity and the big questions, then there's no problem for me. Also, adding to that the fact that the Bible actually, how do you say this, kind of predicts, or it actually talks about, is that uh, we are expected to be sinning even though we are Christians. So I just don't know. I didn't know any of this, but at that point, that's the decision I made. Questions were not being
How
answered. Yeah,
how old were you around this time where you were doubting the
I was
Catholicism?
12, 13 years old.
About the time of confirmation and or prior to being
Prior to it,
confirmed in the
prior to
and
it.
catechism and all of that. So you didn't experience or go through any of that kind of training or
No,
teaching?
I remember Jana, that when I started having doubts, and since I didn't have anyone to have conversations with, when they took us to mass in the middle of the day, sometimes we would go to mass because it was a Catholic school, and everyone would stand up to how do you say this in English, to get the um, la hostia. How do you say that in English? The body, the supposed
The
the
communion
the
or the
communion. There you go.
Eucharist?
Thank you. The
Yes.
Eucharist. Thank you. So I would
Hmm.
I would I would stand. I would sit. I wouldn't stand up, and you would see all students standing up and doing it. I would just sit. I would just sit by myself, saying, "I'm not going to be part of this without knowing if this is true, or without having conversations about it. I cannot just believe in something only because of societal or cultural pressure. But just I'm not that way." Although
Right.
at the same
I
time,
think
yeah, go ahead, please.
I was going to say that really speaks um, to your personality, your character, your strength of belief, in that you weren't, especially at that age
Mm,
when you want to go along and be accepted by your peers, that you were willing to go a different direction
yeah,
and stay seated. That speaks to something of your independence, also
yeah.
your intellectual integrity.
Mm, mm.
Like you say, you weren't willing to do something you didn't believe in. So that
And to
that
be
speaks
honest with
volumes.
you, Jenna, to be honest with you, if they had conversations with me, like let's sit and ask your questions and talk, I would have been super open. like to even, because at that point I wasn't truly like a, I didn't think thoroughly about things. So if they had given me the opportunity to have a conversation, I might have kept being a Catholic person. But this is all in this sovereignty of God. I don't have anything to do or say about this. But that was
Mm.
kind of my experience.
So you were just losing some kind of nominal or superficial affiliation or
Hmm.
ritual or association,
Yeah.
not necessarily a true belief.
Hmm. It was actually when I started reading and became a Christian. Um, I was started to reading about the Catholic Church is when I started respecting them a lot. Like I
Mm.
started respecting them a lot. But now, from a standpoint of, okay, let's see what happens throughout history and seeing things from God's perspective, and in some way, there are many things I respect about the Catholic Church a lot, actually.
Yes, yes, of course. So back then, though, at 10, uh, it was just something that you were disassociating from,
Hmm. Hmm.
deciding not to be a part of, essentially, because
Hmm.
you couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
So take us from there, then.
So what happened at that point? Now in retrospective, I think about myself, and I wish we could go back in time and talk to ourselves. And but it was I always lived in a very how do you say this, it was a dichotomy that was very hard to swallow, because I forced myself, and I really want to emphasize this word, like I forced myself to believe that there wasn't a God. But it was very hard for me to accept this. And there were many
Mm,
reasons why. Like, okay, why do I feel when I do such and such thing that I'm doing something wrong? I shouldn't. Well, there's no framework for good and evil. And we do things only because some things work well and some others don't. And then this sense of wonder that I've always had, which is I'm walking down my street in Spain, and my city is Cordoba, and I was just walking, looking at the sky and seeing all the stars and in existence itself, and I go, how can we actually ask questions about everything, but then when it comes to the big questions, we choose to stop asking questions about that. It didn't make sense at all
mm.
to me. But still, I lived as if God didn't exist till I was 27.
Okay. So during this time, so from 10 to 27, that's 17 years.
Hmm.
During this time, you were growing, maturing in your intellect. You were pursuing things. So just for clarity, your reason, you thought, for rejecting Christianity was that it wasn't true, that no one could answer your questions. What did you think Christianity and all of that was, if it wasn't true, or God wasn't real?
So, 100% you have heard, and many audience friends, friends from the audience have heard this as well. But yeah, it's just a way to control people. It's just a way to, Christianity is just stupid, is intellectually dishonest. This is what I thought about Christianity. Is this what you were asking me?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. So yeah, that all of that, like it was in, like there's no evidence. We don't know why people believe this, and of course it was rooted in more, I would say, more emotionally than intellectually. And by the way, when I make that distinction, I don't want to diminish one or the other. Both are incredibly important. But for me, it was okay, so I see these people doing such things, and they talk to me about this, the good and bad and all of this, and there's no consistency. And if I were, if I had been mature, I would have said, okay, I don't see this consistency in them, but instead of rejecting, I'll try to be consistent instead of just rejecting it. But since I wasn't mature, I just rejected it. And I would say it was emotional, intellectual, but more emotional than intellectual at that point.
Mm. So, as you were rejecting Christianity and Catholicism and belief in God, did you understand really what you were embracing in
Mm-mm.
terms of you can call yourself an atheist, but there's a worldview. There are things that you are believing. If there is no God and there is no supernatural, then what is left, right? So you have to embrace, or you're compelled to embrace a different kind of worldview. And I wondered if you thought very thoroughly about what you did believe, other and what that might have been.
Well, that's a very good question. I think I find identity more in the rejection of what I was leaving than what I was aiming towards getting. So my identity was I rejected Christianity. So in that respect, I got stuck with that. So I didn't question any type of belief or anything. I was young too, and again, Jana, in Spain, the culture is so secular that
Mm.
truly there wasn't that much of a difference. To be honest with you, like for example, now I live in Nashville, and when I have conversations with my atheist friends, and actually Christian friends too, when we had conversations, the rejecting a faith or abandoning a faith or becoming a Christian, the change is so dramatic because there's disparity in ways of living, in ways of understanding the world. But in Spain, there wasn't this rupture between two worldviews. It was kind of merged, so there wasn't truly a big difference between the 2.
It just felt like you were unchecking a box, an
Hmm.
unnecessary belief
Yeah,
that you simply lacked a belief in
yeah,
God,
correct.
essentially.
Yeah,
What the mantra we hear a lot these
kind of.
days.
Yeah.
Now, you had talked about just a minute ago, but there were things about your life, observations that you were making, that didn't seem to cohere with a naturalistic or atheistic worldview,
Hmm.
such as knowing objective right and wrong, or
Hmm.
moral obligations and duties, or finding beauty in the world but not having a way to explain it. Did you realize, I mean, in terms of the implications of the naturalistic worldview, you must have felt some kind of tension or cognitive dissonance, or something that, okay, something's not sitting right. There has to be a bigger or a better explanation for what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, I'm experiencing.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I felt all of that, but again, since my new, let's say, belief, and by the way, I do believe that atheism, as a like the definition itself, like it's okay. There's no God. The lack of believing God, new type of argument is an interesting one, but the definition of the word itself is there's no God. Um, for me, my rejection of Christianity at that point, or whatever belief it was, I that became part of my identity, like the rejection of it. So
Right.
I do believe, I do believe that atheism usually becomes a worldview because atheists are in some way obligated to stop believing things that come from Christianity if they become atheists from a within a Christian culture, and to stop believing in those things and believe the opposite of it just because they abandoned Christianity. So I actually had a conversation a few months ago with a friend. He's a secular thinker, writer, and I asked him, "Do you actually feel obligated to abandon every single belief from Christianity when you become an atheist, or are there some actual beliefs that, even though you're an atheist, you think that they're true?" And it's almost like there's almost like they feel push. How can I become an atheist and then retain some beliefs from Christianity? And that's why I believe that atheism, even if many atheists don't want to call it a worldview, it becomes naturally a worldview because it pushes you to believe certain things about the world by rejecting a specific way to look at the world that is, in our case, filtered, or their case, filtered through Christianity. So um,
Yeah, it's hard to deny certain basic intuitions about yourself, like human dignity and value,
yeah,
and that we're somehow qualitatively different
yeah,
than other animals, or whatever in creation, or there are just certain things that are hard to dismiss, that are inherent in who we are, how we perceive ourselves to be, I would imagine it would be very difficult to extract everything from the Christian worldview or the God-centered
Mm,
worldview and become
mm,
as within your atheism, because then that leads to
yeah,
nihilism or rejection of
yeah,
things that you intuitively feel are true or real or good.
yeah.
So
And what?
it
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, one thing that is happening also with something that is happening in today's culture, which is the redefinition of the certain values that have dominated in a good way, I would say, at least Western civilization, like the difference between good and evil, like this relativism when it comes to terminology. It's happening. Like, for example, an atheist would stop saying good and evil and would talk about well-being, but at the end of the day they're actually just redefining in a way to keep talking about the same thing. Um, so I don't think in that respect atheism stops. It's just an idea. It is an actual worldview. That's my belief, and of course, I have conversations with many atheist friends and that reject this way of thinking about this. But I think it's just unavoidable because the belief in God has permeated so much of the way we are, whether we want it or not, that rejecting it pushes you to reject so many things about the way we live our lives. And this is the world in which we live. Many atheists might desire for the world not to be that way, but this is the world in which we live. If you reject Christianity, you're rejecting principles that actually give you the freedom to reject it, even. But it's just interesting conversation, yeah.
Right. So again, as someone who's true to your beliefs and to your sense of um, trying to find truth or living consistently with truth, like just like you weren't willing to stand up for communion or at the Eucharist as a child, as you were growing up and you were finding these tensions, what was moving you, or what allowed you to become open to the possibility of God or that worldview again?
So what happened was, I've always been, you could say, I am still a professional musician. That was my career, saxophone player. And
Huh.
I've always wanted to study philosophy, to be honest with you, because it would tackle the big questions, and I always loved the big questions and discerning and listening to people and all of this. Music just came unexpectedly, and music kind of allowed me to tap onto something that was like I would think better than what we are, something that would let me allow me to express something beyond. So again, as I'm explaining this to you, you can see, Jana, that there is a need again. The need was there to yearn. So I started studying saxophone, and everything, went well. And what happened was, I didn't I didn't care much about big questions when it comes to God, but the big questions without Him. For years, I studied on laws like 7 to 8 hours a day. I was
Wow.
able to develop a style of playing that, long story short, allowed me to get to be a finalist in the TV show called Spain's Got Talent, which is the America's Got Talent version in Spain.
Sure, sure.
So I was a finalist of that TV show. I got to be a finalist of that TV show, and that, I mean, I didn't expect it to. I didn't. I sometimes think about it and I go, wow, that happened to me. But well, so when I was on TV, that allowed me to travel all around the world. They called me to teach and also play. So I went to many places, and at one point they invited me to come to Nashville to be a guest professor at a university called MTSU, and this was 2012. So I came here. My English wasn't good. I mean, I understood some, but I didn't speak it well. So I was here, and as I was having conversations with people here, I understood. Okay, so here you can actually distinguish more. When a person calls himself a Christian and not, you can actually distinguish more. That is interesting. And what happens? It was very well random as an atheist, led by the Spirit. Now as a Christian, because what I did was, what if I spend these 3 months here? I find someone that is teaching Spanish, and I offer like classes or something like language exchange, so they can teach me English, and I can teach them Spanish or help. I sent an email to a company. Uh, the owner of this company answered me. She invited me to a pumpkin carving party. She introduced me to her sister, and her sister is my wife today.
Oh my goodness.
And
Okay.
and she was a Christian.
Okay.
And that was my introduction to Christianity again. So at the beginning, I could tell you more. You can lead the conversation, Jana. But it was a
No.
struggle at the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me about the struggle. Obviously, I'm by implication, I think that you're telling me that she was a fairly authentic, genuine,
Oh yeah.
serious follower of Christ, someone not like what you had experienced
Yeah.
Christianity in Spain, but it made a difference in her life. Is
Yes.
that what
Yes.
you're telling me?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you met her, and do tell me about the struggle, and because it's interesting, an atheist and a Christian um, getting to know each other, I
Oh
guess.
yeah. So what happens? We met and we kept talking, and I remember the first conversation we had. Like it was serious. I actually tend to be to go to deep stuff pretty like quick, and
Right.
she's actually the same, and she didn't have opportunities to be that way as well. So we connected in that respect, very like super quick. And when she told me, I remember the day perfectly. She told me, "I'm actually a Christian." I remember my reaction was, "Oh no, again! Oh man, Christianity again!" But of course, so there were a few things happening to me, and atheists, friends, skeptics would use my story to form a psychological, um, how do you call this, a psychological description of my state of being at that point, to give a reason why I became a Christian. But I went through all of
Right.
this many times because I was insecure about this myself. So what was happening at that time? It was I was idolizing music. Music was an idol for me. I found value only in music and what I could get from it. Um, I wasn't having a good time at all. I was depressed. I was anxious. I was the waves of life would throw me everywhere because I wasn't standing on firm ground at all. And when I met her, I was kind of skeptical about people, because because I was skeptical about goodness. Like they're not true good people in the world.
Mm.
And that skepticism was originated from within me because I also knew that I wasn't a good person. So it's not just external stuff and I'm okay. It was like I recognized that there was something wrong with me as well, but when I was having conversations with her and I saw her reacting at stuff like bad stuff that would happen around her to her, and then I saw Jana the way she was reacting and people around her, like smiling, calm, innocent. She would speak to me just, and she was being honest 100%. I never noticed any type of like trying to do something different from what I'm saying type of thing. Like
Right.
it was so clear, and that really shocked me. So it did my journey. My journey is the intellectual side of it is very important, but this shocked me a lot. And I was having conversations with her, and that, I mean, I liked that a lot about her a lot. But it happened to be the case also that her father, who passed away 5 or 6 years ago now, was a Bible translator, and he was an expert on Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic.
Okay.
So,
That's
so,
pretty substantive. Yes.
and from my ignorance, I said, oh, Christians cannot be intelligent, right? Like that's in my ignorance completely about Christianity at that point. But then when I heard, okay, this person is a PhD, Bible translator, expert in 3 languages, okay. let me see if this person wants to answer my questions. Or And he did sit with me, and through emails, even because I had to go back to Spain for a year. I was just having conversations and this and that, and he was very thoughtful. And we just had a lot of conversations about this. And the struggle began when I realized, I think that there's something in this, but at one point we were having a long distance relationship. I was in Spain and she was here in the States. And I was actually trying to understand Christianity on my own. She was kind of talking to me and helping me, but I kind of said, I want to do this on my own because I don't want to be influenced, because that wouldn't be honest from my part to become a Christian only because you're a Christian.
Right.
And at that point, to be honest with you, I started investigating on my own. And long story short, again, I did a survey on the history of philosophy, Western history of philosophy, and I understood. Okay, believe in God is one of the most rational things a human being can entertain. Like this
Mm.
is, and this is not my opinion, Jana. This is the history of Western thought. Like actually, people that didn't even believe in God entertained the thought in an intellectual way, in an honest way, as if it were a potential good idea, even if it was if it wasn't true after all. It was treated as something important. That blew my mind.
Mm.
Then when I did a small survey, listening to as many people as I could, both Christians and non-Christians actually, and then realized that science itself. There are many things I could say about science. No, I'm not a scientist, more in a conceptual manner. But when I realized that the scientific method is describing what is already there, but the scientific method cannot tell us what things are, that blew my mind as well.
Yes.
And then historically, then I read about as many religions as I could. But when I read about Christianity, and then I realized, okay, so if Jesus didn't resurrect, Christianity is false. And Christianity stands on this claim, and this claim is historical. So we could even find evidence to undermine it. So it's not based on a book coming out of the sky floating. It actually comes from a historical event that could be,
The
yeah.
yeah
So
the which historical event are you speaking of?
the resurrection. And when that
Yes.
when I read all of that, I said, "How is this possible that I've been so ignorant and not being more open-minded as I thought I was to just tackle these questions?" So I was tackling all these questions, and I just started just dealing with this, and I my heart started opening to the possibility of God's existent, but not Christian, but just God. And then Uh, you know, after I did all my research, I remember it was actually the Sermon of the Mount. When I read the Sermon of the Mount for the first time, I said, I mean, what this person is saying, even if it were, I wouldn't mind if this person was a person, a frog, or a tree talking. I would follow anyone that would say these things about the world. But
Mm.
again, it happened to be the same person that was calling himself God, and the same person that was actually with one of the biggest fears I have, and one of the biggest fears that humanity has as well, which is the fear of death. He overcame death. He gives you he gives you an identity beyond yourself while celebrating your own identity. He it was incredible. And yeah, it was the Sermon of the Mount. I didn't understand at that point, but I said, yeah, I really want to follow Jesus. And it happens to be that following Jesus makes you become a Christian. So I
Right.
guess I guess I have to become a Christian. And here's the thing I wanted to share, and audience members will appreciate this because they will hear this from atheist friends a lot. I was wondering, Jana, did I become a Christian only because I met my wife? That was so, that was really like this, that was hard for me. But then I started analyzing this, talking to people, and then through logic and people that understand more about logic than I do, they talk to me about the genetic fallacy, which is the way we get to believe in something, the way how we get to believe in something doesn't say, doesn't undermine the belief itself. Because
Right,
I understood if the way I get to believe in Christianity is undermined by the fact that I met Christ through my wife, which by the way, it is actually what Jesus asked his followers to do, exactly what my wife did with me, just sharing the gospel. I mean, what is one thing that we learn on earth that we don't learn from other people? I mean, we are born, and all of a sudden, you found yourself speaking English, and I found myself speaking Spanish. So since we didn't get to this conclusion or on our own, or we didn't choose the language that we speak, therefore, for example, this language shouldn't be spoken. Like the genetic fallacy is very important, and it really calms me down on the intellectual side of things.
right, right.
Yeah.
I think that that's a very important point of clarification. I hear the same story that someone will say, "Well, they just became a Christian because they met a girl," or that kind of thing. But I call that the catalyst.
Mm,
It's something that disrupts someone's life. Someone disrupts your life, and they give you a different picture of reality from the
yeah.
way that they think and live.
Yeah.
And it may be that you're attracted to them, but at the end of the day, as you say, how you come to believe does not matter. Well, it does matter, but it doesn't speak to the truth of the belief.
That is,
So
yes.
yeah, so I think that's what you're trying to say, and I too hear a lot that someone will take that initiating catalyst
Yeah.
and generalize that as to the whole reason why you believe,
Yes.
and that's not the case. It's a part of the story. It's the initiating part of the story, perhaps, but you went through a process. It sounds like a
Hmm.
painstaking process,
Yeah.
philosophically, scientifically, historically. You did due diligence to read, to think about the premises of these beliefs and whether or not they made sense
Hmm.
with what you were reading and what you were experiencing and all of those things and what you were seeing, even in the authenticity of the Christians who you were now being introduced to. So um, I think that, to your point, that skeptics need to give these stories a fully orbed look, not
Yes.
just at an initiating event as to why someone believes in, and then that they then conform their beliefs to what they want them to believe. I think that that's an unfair reading
Yes. Yeah.
of the journeys, but
And,
that's what often happens.
yeah, and you know what, Jana? I think our skeptic friends, our atheist friends too, should be actually very thankful that the genetic fallacy also applies to the way they abandon their faith or the reason why they don't have one. Because I mean, I don't have numbers. I haven't made any study of this, but I would venture to say that many, like many atheist non-believers abandoned their faith not because of intellectual diligence, but because of having a bad experience, and not always, but it is always part of it. And from me, from my perspective, I could diminish their whole story just by saying, okay, so you didn't become an atheist because of actually good arguments, but because this happened to you. Therefore, I don't think I should believe your story, or I don't think atheism has something to go for. So thankfully, the genetic fallacy applies to everyone, and is neutral
Yes.
in that respect. You know?
Yeah, it works both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We all come to belief and form our beliefs for all kinds of different reasons.
Hmm.
Some have some direct relationship to truth, some has more direct relationship to experience
Yeah.
and culture and all kinds of things that inform. why
yeah,
we believe what we believe. But yes, um, but to your story,
mm,
again, you came to believe that it was true, that Christ was real, that
mm,
Christianity was true and worthy of belief. So much so that you gave your life to Christ. You mentioned the gospel that your wife talked, or did she? Or I presume you learned of the gospel. And for those listeners who are skeptics who are not familiar with the gospel, could you explain what that is and how it ties in with the intellectual? There's the intellectual assent to beliefs, but there's
yeah,
also something more.
yes. Yeah, so interesting that my journey with Christianity accommodates beautifully to the doctrine, to the doctrine of sanctification, which is okay, I give my life to Christ, but there's a journey of learning in which truly I'm giving my life to Christ every single day. This is a process that it doesn't end. So I became a Christian more intellectually than, let's say, internally. I didn't understand that Christianity is a worldview that starts with repentance. I didn't understand that at the beginning. It was super, it was amazing. Oh wow, God exists. He created the world and all of that. But I think I didn't understand well yet the meaning of what Jesus did on the cross. That took me a while to understand. And just to answer your question, so just to explain the gospel to our atheist and non-Christian friends, I'm going to explain it, and there are many things that they're going to require more explanation for, but just to do it as succinctly as possible. God exists. He created the universe. He created human beings to have a relationship with them. Human beings moved away from him and wanted to create a world of their own. So they started sinning. They started doing things that are wrong in the eyes of God. Um, Human beings, we cannot save ourselves from this madness that we brought into the world. So God, in His mercy, decided to become a human being and died for all of us, so that he could pay for the penalty of our own sins, which demonstrate an incredible amount of love that I still don't understand. So that if we believe in him, then we have an opportunity not to only transform our life on this side of eternity, which Christianity doesn't promise happiness. It promises joy through suffering, but also it brings you hope because you'll have an eternal life with him, and everything is received as an incredible gift, as the universe is, the laws, the physical laws are, everything that happens is, and it becomes a worldview of thankfulness.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way I would say the gospel, I would
Yeah,
explain it.
I love that you said that so clearly, because like you say, you grew up in a religious environment,
Mm-hmm,
but
mm-hmm,
you had never heard the gospel
mm-mm,
through all of that
yeah,
religious training or
mm-hmm,
exposure. So I appreciate that. I think there are probably many who are listening who never really have heard the gospel laid
mm,
out. So thank you for that, for
yeah,
making that clear. So you came to a point of acceptance and then you came to believe of the fullness and wholeness uh, of the Christian gospel and of the Christian worldview, and your relationship with Christ. So obviously, it has changed you. You,
yeah,
um, you mentioned at the beginning that you're involved in a number of different ministries, and you're making it. It's so important to you that it
mm,
seems like your life is centered on Christ and helping others to know Him.
yeah, yeah. That is, it took me a while, of course, but that was my aim. As soon as I believed that Christ did actually, God exists, and then he became a human being in the person of Jesus Christ and did this for humanity, which was very important for me. This is not all about Christians. Like, he did this for the entire world. Christians are the ones that actually accept that he did that for them, that he did that for every single human being. The beauty of it and how it resonates with our sense of justice and mercy that we have towards others. It was beautiful. So music was, I was in a good place with music at that point. So I said, so if this is true, I mean, if this is true, I really want to spend the rest of my life talking about this. So slowly I started leaving music behind and just focusing on ministry and learning and spending time with people and listening. And yeah, so yeah, it has been a nice journey. And again, I want to emphasize that even though I call myself a follower of Jesus, I'm a Christian. There are many things I don't know. As a Christian, I know where truth is, but I don't understand all of it that there is to understand about it. So when
Mm.
I approach conversations with my non-believers friends and they ask me questions about, I don't know, how to things from the Christian theology relate to the way we live, or how science and this relates, yeah, I don't have no problem to say I don't know. It actually, I call it the theological I don't know, because it's theological to say I don't know. So I'm okay with that, and
Yes.
that room and the way that God also makes sure that we everyone that we keep humble, because he used the weak things of the world in order to show his strength. I mean, the Bible is just what a revolution it is. Wow. And another thing I would say, this is all about the intellectual side of things and all of that, but the most precious things, Jana, that I've experienced are all personal. The cross makes all my wonderings about life, when it comes to intellectual conversations, being, well, no, my brain, I wanted to say nonsense. It's not nonsense, but like it's not as important. Like you
Right.
realize what the meaning of the cross is, and then how Christ pushes you to do things that are actually very revolutionary. Like if you're suffering, then having the thoughts of, oh wow, I'm suffering like Christ did, and this is an opportunity for others to see Christ through my suffering. This is an actual revolution. This is a revolution that I sometimes wonder if even Christians have understood it yet. Like it is so big and immense, the world of Christianity, that wow, it keeps pushing me so much. It is the things that the scripture says about who we are, which by the way we are only secondary characters, that we're not the main character of the history of the universe. There are things that, for my own life, for example, if it's okay that I share something that I learned yesterday.
Sure.
Yesterday,
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean, after 10 years being a Christian, I learned, okay, so I tend to be an anxious person all my life. And anxiety got really bad at one point, and all of this. And I of course, praying, being with Him, the belief. And you go, how, how can this belief help me be calm in a moment in which I'm supposed to be anxious? Like it is so counterintuitive. And it was yesterday when I was reading the letter of Colossians, and I thought, okay, Jesus Christ is this sustainer of the world, which means that every time I breathe, that breath is part of His will. So even when I'm afraid, He's actually sustaining me. I'm part of His will. I'm alive. The beauty of the beliefs are so extraordinary that you see, I don't know if you're noticing, but that's why I just want to talk to people about Christ, and I want to be
Yes.
challenged too, because it is just beautiful. So
Yeah, it is beautiful, and I'm thinking too. I know you are humble, there are so many things we don't know, right? And
yeah,
but there are some things that we do know, and
yeah,
I'm wondering, in your life without God, you spoke of during your time of just playing music, that you were lacking meaning and feeling anxious and depressed, and or even earlier where you couldn't find grounding for morality, what was right and wrong, or you had a sense of wonder in the beauty, but you had nowhere to place it. But now, in your Christian worldview, there are places
mm,
for those things, and there's a
mm,
grounding for why things are and why we can say something is right and wrong. There's a wholeness there, a cohesion, a making sense of the things that you weren't able to
mm,
make sense of
mm,
before. Would you say that uh, has given you not only an intellectual kind of settledness, I guess you could say? I mean, not that you're not curious, and not that you're continuing to seek and to learn and to know, but there is again, just a making sense of life and
mm.
the way that we know it and experience in a way that wasn't possible for you without a God-centered universe.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely, Jenna. I mean, it really does change everything. I mean, it's almost like having the glasses, like a new filter through which you understand everything that happens to you. So I don't know, as a musician, for example, when I became a Christian, just to give you an example, when I became a Christian and I started seeing beauty, as you mentioned, Jana, and people expressing this yearning that we have that cannot be met on earth with anything that we do. Yeah, C.S. Lewis said it beautifully with his arguments about desire. Um, when when you realize that God is there and has given us this ability to interact with the world in that way, it really, yeah, everything makes sense. And even actually evil and suffering, which is a very difficult thing to swallow, sometimes for both Christians and non-Christians, it actually makes sense if through God's perspective and what happens and what we did as human beings, the way everything has been created, like everything makes sense.
As we're closing, Pedro, there are skeptics, hopefully, and atheists listening to this, and they see you, and or they hear you, and that you were once an atheist who rejected God, and you lived in a godless world, and you understand it from that perspective, but yet you're on the other side, and you have a lot of conversations with non-believers,
Hmm.
and so you're very wise, I think, in this regard, in terms of giving advice
Mm,
to those who might be curious enough to look, like you did when you went back to Spain, and you were open enough to do due diligence to look at truth and where to find it. So, how would you recommend a skeptic who might be listening today?
mm. Um, I mean, the first thing I would say is that I respect them a lot. I really do, because we have so many things in common. We're human beings. We're thrown into this world, and we don't know why at the beginning. We all wonder about the same questions. I truly respect them. The first thing I would say is it is difficult because pain is very painful. I know, I really do know that, but I really encourage my friends atheists and skeptics that even though pain is painful, and actually God cares about every pinch of pain that they're going through and we all go through, I would challenge them to consider Christ for who he is and nothing else. That they should forget what I am saying to them right now, my story, anyone's story, that they could actually, if possible, for them to eliminate any cultural, societal preconceptions that they have about Christ and that they face Him directly. If they can do it, I would respectfully encourage them to do that. I would also say that asking questions about God and even questions His existence is, I would say, is a good thing because there are two ways of doubting about God. So you can doubt towards Him or you can doubt away from Him.
Mm.
So when it comes to doubting, I keep doubting certain things, but I doubt towards him. And that is not a bad thing. I am learning. Every single character in the Bible doubts at one point. The Bible was very, very succinct and honest about this. There's a reason why the Bible is Scripture. God is showing us that people struggle through Scripture. We don't have scriptures that are describing a world that is perfect, that everything is going okay. No, you see Peter and Paul having fights, you have problems, you have characters doubting. I love that Scripture is not afraid of describing the world as it is, which is actually evidence for me to say, okay, they're not trying to lie me here. This is the way things are. Um, I would encourage them too to be more introspective about their pain and their questions both, and to really face something that we're all going to face, regrettably, which is one day we're going to pass away, and then existence itself becomes like an empty vacuum of, I would say, from my perspective, like no, like nonsense, but not in negative connotation of the word. Like there's no way to make sense of anything. So I would love to, for my atheist non-believer friends, to do, also Christians by the way, but to be more introspective about what's going on, why they are alive, why the reason why they exist, to keep asking questions, and also to celebrate the fact that they can ask them and not take that for
Mm.
granted. And that is, if there is anything I can do for them, I'm always open and willing to have more conversations. And I know that I spoke a lot, Jana, in this interview, but when I have conversations with people, I would rather not say anything and listen. I like listening more.
Mm.
But the context
Mm.
is you interviewing me, so that's why that's why
Yes,
I stop.
of course, you have full permission. That's why you're here. So, yeah, and as far as the advice that you would give to Christians who engage, you are a living example of someone who actually engages with those who are skeptical. You've already mentioned some really wonderful things about being humble, about living consistently. I think of all of those who, you experienced a lot of Christian hypocrisy where they didn't seem to believe or take the belief seriously or live it out, but then you met someone who did. um, there was a time where people couldn't answer your questions or didn't want to, or whether it was they didn't know the answer, so they said there were none, or whatever. um, there's so many things, there's so many directions you could go here, but how would you encourage Christians to engage with those who don't believe?
Um, this is a very interesting topic for me. I would say that first of all, before even considering the engagement, is actually being honest to see if they want to have that engagement and the reason why. So first of all, realize why they might not be wanting or willing. There must be a reason why. Could be cultural, it could be society, it could be fear, it could be a little bit of all of them at the same time. Once they realize that, and they realize that Jesus has asked us to do this for him in the most humble yet truthful way, then it's a matter of keep praying and asking and pursuing him, because I don't take for granted prayer, direct communication with God. And we are given different talents and gifts as Christians. um, for example, I like to challenge my beliefs every day, so I read and secular writings every day just to make sure that what I believe is true. The conversation of doing and engage with non-believers for Christians is more, let me talk to Christ, let me pursue him, and let's see what he's telling me, and how I can use the talents that he has given me. Because it could be that a Christian, can engage with non-believers by serving them, by having conversations, by there's so many ways to do this, by helping, by listening, by just being, by showing up, by the gospel permeates all our body, thought, mind, heart, speak, everything. So um, I would say Christians shouldn't be hard on themselves, and we all need to be great, incredible apologists or anything like this, because actually, uh, God, people see God's power through weaknesses.
Mhm.
So it's actually, if they find themselves being weak, that is what actually God has been using throughout history in order to tell others about His power. So just encouragement, a lot of prayer, and find the reasons why perhaps they might not have a willing to do so, and from there I would take it and see where they
Mm.
go.
Oh, that's very wise advice. Is there anything else that comes to mind that you'd want to say before we close, or do you think we've covered everything?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say, Jana, that I respect hugely what you're doing, just to bring this conversation to the forefront, the conversation about the big questions, and with your smiling, it's your smile inviting both Christians and non-Christians to have conversations. I think this is one of the healthiest things to do, and I am thrilled that you gave me an opportunity to spend time with you. And if this is part of something that we can do, if there is any listener, both Christians and non-Christians, that would like to connect with me, please do so. Is it okay if I share a little bit of my information?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely, and we'll include it in the episode notes as well.
Okay. So if anyone wants to contact me and ask me questions, or even they want me to listen to their stories, they can go to askandwonder.com, and they'll find my email there, askandwondernashville@gmail.com. So they can email me directly there, and any questions that they might have, anything. I love having these conversations. I love listening to people. I respect people's journey so much. So I'm just thrilled that I got to be a part of this. So thank you, Jana, so much.
Oh, you're so welcome, Pedro. It's a privilege to have you on, and I love the work that you're doing, and especially bringing forward these conversations between non-believers and believers. That's a very it's so necessary in these days that to have actually conversations
Yeah.
without, you know, in a meaningful and congenial way. You're actually dialoguing about real issues like the big questions,
Mm,
and doing it in a respectful a dialogue so that people can assess both sides, if you will, in a way that's not inflammatory or
mm,
degrading in any way. And
mhm,
that's just the one wonderful that just that's just part of the work, obviously, that you do. But I appreciate your availability. That means a lot.
mm,
But Pedro, thank you so much for
mm.
coming on the podcast today. Your story is full. It's rich. It's honest. It's intellectual. It's emotional. Uh, but I do appreciate some of the things too that you brought out about issues of the genetic fallacy, and that we need to really give others. You know, you're also you say you love listening to stories, and I think you understand, like all of our stories, they're full,
Mm,
and there are different pieces and parts and different influences and different reasons why we believe the way that we do. But at the end of the day, you came to believe in Christ because it was true.
mm,
He was true.
mm.
It was real. He was truth. And despite all of the other things that went along with it, and he's obviously transformed your life.
Yeah.
So thank you so much again, Pedro, for coming on. I know that so many people are going to be blessed through your story.
Thank you so much, Jenna.